very mindful that stomachs are probably calling far stronger than anything else at the moment. So what I want to do is really just give you a bit of food for thought, something to chew on, pick up a few points. I have just completed writing a book on black economic empowerment. And because of that, I'm going to ask you to do something you shouldn't do, and I'm going to say, trust me. And basically what I want you to do is to say, trust me, black economic empowerment is not going to satisfy. At the end of the day, black South Africans, the way we've constructed policy, they're going to feel that their expectations around a transformed and an exclusive economy will not have been met. So I want you to take that as a given, and believe me on that one. And basically what I want to do is then say, well, what do we need to be rethinking? How do we go beyond the kind of constructive empowerment that we've put in place and look further? And I think it's very important for us to start looking and thinking differently about our society. And this message has been coming through, I think, both from the tables and the report backs and from the talks that we've been hearing. But what do we really need to be thinking about differently? And I think this is what we need to start engaging on far more specifically. Last night I was at a dinner, I was hosting in fact, and I was brainstorming an idea with people, and somebody said, will you all stop using the P word, the T word, the S word, the L word? And it was partnership, sustainability, transformation, leadership. Not because they're not important, but simply because we use them too much and they're ill-defined. So I think it's very important that we start thinking about exactly what we mean when we use these kind of terms and what we would like to see emerge when we look to the future and we think of something like sustainability, for example. So I think the first thing I want to say when we think about rethinking, what's become very evident in the last few years is the world has changed, and we need to start looking at our whole way of approach on how we look at transformation in the context of a very different kind of world. I think the one thing that we are very aware of at the moment is that we live in a very unpredictable and uncertain world. I think we've just needed to see the financial markets collapse and implode, and that gives us a very good feeling. No one predicted the extent of it, although now a lot of people saying they did. But no one really felt that we would get to where we have. The other thing is you can ask yourselves, how many of you know where you're going to be in 5 years? We live a very uncertain life. We don't know that we're going to have our jobs. We don't know where the markets will be. We don't know what global impacts will hit us. So we live with that, and that's a reality we have to deal with. The other really key reality that's been brought home much more in the last few years is our interconnectedness. And one of the big lessons that comes, obviously, if we look at the US subprime crisis, they have a housing problem, everything, and then we take a lot of the flak for it. We're interconnected. We can't disconnect ourselves from the global implications of actions that are taken elsewhere in the world. But climate change is probably about the most brutal lesson that we could have on interconnectedness, and that we're sitting here knowing that we behave in ways that will damage our future, and we forget that between ourselves, between countries, between ourselves and the planet, we are extremely interconnected. Even in South Africa, we talk of two economies. Those are interconnected, in fact. We should not really be talking of two economies. We should be looking at ourselves far more integrally, and then how do we resolve those issues. So I think, what does it really mean for us if we're saying that we're in a world context that is very unpredictable and has a lot of interconnectedness? Now, I'm not going to go through all the points I'd listed. I think the one issue that's come up very clearly globally is that we've all been measuring well-being wrongly. And I don't know if any of you are aware of Bhutan, but it's a tiny little country on the foothills and the mountains of the Himalayas, and they developed something called the Gross National Happiness Index many years ago. But they have become incredibly popular now in mainstream economics. So you're now seeing new institutes being formed, you're now seeing new measurements being made on well-being, and all of them are paying attention to what the Bhutanese have been looking at, because they're saying well-being is far beyond the issues of material well-being. And they look at culture, they look at social well-being, they looked at environment. They've been doing this for a long time. And they say it's all about balance, and how do we find that balance? And the world is trying to come to grips with this, and no one really has any answers. The other thing is that as a country, if we live with this level of unpredictability, the new way of looking at interconnectedness, the new way of trying to deal with stuff, governments have to change. I mean, it's fundamental. The old-style bureaucrat is very ill-suited to trying to lead and affect some of the changes that they often have to do or put in place new regulatory environments. And we need really very nimble-footed bureaucrats, in a sense. They need to be able to think on their feet. They need to be able to have very strong knowledge-based systems, because when we're writing about these issues, you found that there's no information. We have a lot of big holes in our information in South Africa that enable us to make some reasonable decisions about the issues we're talking about at this forum. And I think the other thing which is fundamentally important, and it's come through very often, is that we've often, when we're looking at doing things afresh, we need to be open to very many new ideas. I've been in the BEE field. It's been an area that has been very difficult to critique. When I was writing the book, people would say to me, "God, you're brave." Because I did a very serious critique of the policies. And I think what we want to find when we look at something like this is to say we're using a lot of old formulas and old policies and old approaches where we have a very different world and changing very fast. So I'm going to give you one example. I don't know if you're aware, but we do have a policy to relocate white farmers, I mean obviously not forcibly, but to relocate white farmers into other parts of Africa. And the rationale for this is we need to free up land because we're not achieving land redistribution fast enough. And other African countries are very keen to get our farmers. So you've got prime land being freed up in Uganda and Angola and Zambia to receive white South African farmers. And Liberia, when they heard about this, said, "No, we will have them, no problem. These are farmers we know that they can farm in difficult circumstances. They've learned that, and we need that." So the problem is that we're relocating people with skills, but at the same time we're facing climate change. And the predictions are, under normal circumstances, that agricultural production in South Africa could drop as a result of climate change by anything by 15 to 35%. So what we need is farmers who know how to farm in difficult conditions, because we're heading for very difficult conditions. And for me, we've used an old formula on land redistribution, and I'm not saying land redistribution is not important, it's critical, but we're using old approaches to solve problems in very new contexts. And I'm saying let's think afresh, let's be innovative, let's look at how we can deal with these kind of problems. Many of these problems can't be resolved, and I think this has come through as a theme, by the government. We look to governments to solve them. But the nature of the challenges and problems before ourselves and globally are so big that we're talking a lot more internationally and in South Africa about creating new dialogues, new partnerships, and new arrangements. We're not clear what these mean, because we've tried a lot of them out and they haven't worked. But there is a sense that no one constituency or stakeholder can make the decisions that need to be made around turning around our economies or our societies. I think there's a Jeffrey Sachs of the Earth Institute at Columbia University. He talks about needing to find unaccustomed harmony. And I thought this is what we might need to think about again in South Africa. We've had in the past a very strong emphasis on non-racialism, non-racial policies. Those seems to have slipped and subsided a bit. Can we not, when we look at new partnerships, can we not, if we look at farming and land redistribution, find some unaccustomed harmony and find some new solutions and think creatively? The other thing I think that and it's come up here, is that we need to reinstate values, commitment, responsibility for what we have, and we can't keep abdicating that. Now, I come out of the empowerment domain. I'm very critical of the formulaic response that we can package something as complex as transformation into a score.